Sasha, if we can just start with, you can just tell us something about yourself,
Okay.
where you grew up and how you became involved with New Brunswick, but if we can start at the beginning.
Okay. I grew up in Philadelphia, right outside of Philadelphia, south of Philly, a little town called Hardgrove. Went to a college up in New York State called King's College. Not the King's College that was in Pennsylvania, but the one up in New York. It was a religiously oriented college. Then I went to seminary for 4 years in Manhattan. Became ordained as a Baptist minister. Subsequent to that, I got my master's in counseling at the Postgraduate Center of Mental Health. During my early ministry, I had 3 full-time churches, but during that period of time, my interpretation of my own faith system was to be involved in community, and as one builds the spiritual dimensions of people's lives, that you address the social issues that were very strongly developing in the 1960s with civil rights, mental health, the war in Vietnam, etc. So I was drawn to community needs, and during a period of transition in my life, I went into the public marketplace and said, what could I do to both exercise my faith system, but also try to deal with issues of community, issues of poverty, organization, and community needs. So then I had an opportunity, after working a year in that old CETA program that you may remember from the
Comprehensive Employment Training.
That's right. I was the director for a year because a friend of mine directed the whole program for Union County. Then I went to Newark, and for 5 years I worked in the Vailsburg
And just
section of
these were
Newark.
what times? Just
Okay,
this is for the records.
The Newark, the Vailsburg experience started in 74, 75, and I was there for 5 years, until 81 when I came to Brunswick Tomorrow. But that was a small community agency that was doing neighborhood organizing. A lot of community organizers were there that I managed and directed the programs. And we had senior citizen programs, we had youth programs right on South Orange Avenue. And the goal was to try to enrich that community and various communities, North Ward, the Ironbound, the South Ward, each had community organizations to try to network them and try to make some impact on the systems that impacted the city, which was government, finances, and since the economics of Newark was struggling then and now, the neighborhood still needed some strength and a sense of identity. So here I am in that process of expressing faith while I'm serving a church part-time. So at a certain juncture, after 8 years of...
And this is which church now?
A Baptist church, the Northern American Baptist tradition, which is a little bit more progressive than our friends from the South. So at that period in my life, I was just searching what are alternatives, even though I was still fully committed. And a friend of mine sent me an ad in the paper, Wall Street Journal had an ad about this organization called the Brunswick Tomorrow. And it listed the kinds of things that they were interested in, which was human services, health-related issues, educational-related issues, neighborhood development. And it was an ad that looked like I would have written it. At that time, I knew nobody down here. No, I did know David Gravy.
The time was roughly when?
1980. That's when I began a process. I had about 100 applications, and I went through the process. And after 7 interviews with small groups, a large board, John Lynch, Tony Morano, all the names that were part of that period, I was selected, and in 1981, January of 81, I began. But that transition, do you want me to go on in terms of the transition to here, or do you want to answer your question? Because at one question it asked about personal motivations. Why would I leave a grassroots community organization and come here? Well, it was a struggle, and some of my friends in counseling to me raised the question, why would you want to leave that grassroots community to work within a setting which was dramatically different, that had a corporate focus, revitalization in terms of physical approach. And even though they verbalized the vision for quality of life, the vision of neighborhood response to issues of housing and jobs and education, the question I was raising inside myself, are they for real? Do they really mean to try to connect revitalization and human services and quality of life? So it was a fascinating opportunity to say, well, why don't I go, invest a period of time, and see whether this group of people who articulated it very well would go through that process of really trying to make an investment in community, which included culture and the arts. It included employment in the things that are traditionally needed in urban environment. And so I invited, a little bit with fear and trepidation, I came down and started in 1981.
And you were living where?
I lived in Colonia at the time, and after my first 6 months here, I said to my boss, which was the chairman, John Heldrich, which most of you know, and I see his name across the street, who was, he kind of changed my life because he was more a traditional conservative Republican, but he taught me, as someone a little bit different in perspective, the connection between economic development, employment, and health and human services. And I began to see a dimension that I hadn't seen before. Now you asked me a question, and I should have.
Sure. No.
You answered.
I guess you were talking something about your personal journey, your perspective on the objectives of, Johnson and Johnson and the others. I mean, why were they doing this?
I had to understand that, and it took a little bit of period of time, even though I heard the language, because I was impressed that J&J had options to leave the town, but made a social commitment. I had occasion to meet Richard Sellars, who was the original CEO of obviously J&J, but also the head of the Development Corporation. And I was impressed. He was a very dynamic kind of man. And he left the room. When he was in the room, there was a presence. And then to meet and get to know John Heldrich. And I saw that J&J appeared to be deeply serious about making more than just a physical and economic investment in the city. And then came the Hyatt, because both, as I mentioned earlier, were holes in the ground when I came in 1981. And we began to think, how does that really translate into the people in the city really getting support and help? And that was my struggle. How will that happen, given the corporate context? But my first meeting, I had around the table Roy Ebbs, Herb Feist, Tony Morano, whose goal was to make that happen, along with John Heldrich and the head of public service, Ken Wheeler, who was at Rutgers at the time, and a representative from the city, and Development Corporation. And here are these 7 or 8 people at 7 o'clock in the morning in John Heldrich's office, and I'm sitting saying, they really are verbalizing, they really mean this. And so I began to see that J&J, through John Heldrich, was really making a commitment, not just down there to spend millions of dollars, but put financial commitment to the work of the Brunswick Tomorrow, which was reinforced over the years by decisions that were made that did affect, in my judgment, the inner life of the city. Now, it isn't dramatic in the same public way as building a new hotel or Rutgers building a new stadium, but it was quietly, in my judgment, and incrementally part of a process that kind of tried, at least publicly, to balance some of the economic development. I think without addressing some of the socially related issues, the community would have really resented the redevelopment. Now, during that period, and you were here for part of that period, there was backlash, there was disagreement. And what I did when I first came was go to people's houses, come as your students. What's his name? You would know him if I mentioned it, because I know him now very well. But he had a whole neighborhood group together. I went there.
Tony Nelson?
No, it was Sachs. I'll think of his name maybe. If not, I don't. But I would go there, and then the 2 things John Heldrich did, and stop me if you want me to go on, was he said, Ted, I think our board needs to know what you've been doing in Newark. So he took the 25-member board of directors. Here's Dave Cravio and someone from the city, Development Corporation, Rutgers, Public Service, Squibb, Roy Epps, the community, and we went down to Newark and spent a day going to North Ward, going to Vailsburg where I was, going to Tri-Cities, which is another community-based group, going down to the Ironbound, which we also had dinner at, which was kind of nice. But they were listening. They were hearing some of the people I worked with and what they perceived were some of the needs. And it was positive to me because John Heldrich gave me the chance to say, here's who I am and where I was from. And it was then part of what I brought was reflected in what they experienced in that. And the second thing John did during my first 6 months to a year, because one of the things I wanted to underscore is one of the things I discovered was the way Heldrich and the key decision makers listened to the community. John visited every church in New Brunswick with me. We went and talked to the pastors and sometimes one of their deacons or trustees, and all he did was sit back and listen and try to frame that in terms of our priorities as an organization.
And when you say he listened to the minister, or were there actually members of the
there
church
was a
there
few
speaking?
sometimes, but it was really the first time that in the history of this process that anybody had knocked on the door of the religious establishment to even listen.
What were the churches saying?
Well, I guess they were looking at it with pleasure. Oh, we're going to finally do something because they saw J&J corporate. But they also raised issues concerning, their own congregations, the need for jobs, concern for the children in terms of the educational systems in New Brunswick, the desire for health-related issues, the desire for a supermarket, which it took a long time to finally reach a point where that little supermarket down the street still exists, but that was one of the very important things. They were concerned about the health program. The hospital was shutting down some emergency services, evening 24-hour kind of service, and there was a concern about that. So they heard all these concerns, and that's what triggered, in conjunction with UMD&J, the city, Devco, the Chandler Center, which still exists now. Dick Reynolds, who was key at the dean over there, I was on his advisory committee. We sat down, Devco helped with the building, and that was an illustration of a partnership which grew out of the community saying, we need health for indigent and low-income people. Now, again, going back, it wasn't as dramatic publicly where everybody cheered because, as they would, building the big building. But in the neighborhood sense, it was communicating, we don't want you to think that we're forgetting about neighborhood health. And Chandler has been an outstanding symbol of that ever since I left the board of it back in 1981. So there was a need. And then they also had a concern about homeless people. Because we had, I don't know what the status of homelessness is right now in terms of New Brunswick, particularly people on the street, but we were encouraged, and I helped encourage trailers down in Boyd Park, and John Lynch had some reservations about that as mayor because of the image, but John finally recognized that it was better to have people there than on the streets because we try to connect it to more than just staying overnight, but connecting it to mental health services, drug treatment services, employment services, and it gradually led to the feeding program at Elisha's Promise, which is very popular now and well supported, which all started back in the late 1980s, growing out of that incremental process, the clergy, other community people saying, here are some of the needs. And because of my clergy background, I not only developed friendships with the clergy, but I was invited in their pulpits. I got to know some of their people. When there was a funeral, I would attend. And so I became engaged to connect the Brunswick Tomorrow philosophy and message to community. And so
the New Brunswick Tomorrow philosophy, if you had to sum it up, is
to address the quality of life of the entire community in relationship to health, human services, and those human services needs that grow out of those words. And my learning was, even though obviously it was a good job for me, to be very frank with you, it was a professionally real good step for me.
How many years were you there?
14 years. I was there from 81 right up to 1995 when I left to now, and then I went to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation program office. I was doing work with them on the same kind of things, across the country in terms of helping to do grants, but it was an evolution in me. But I think it also was an evolution as New Brunswick Tomorrow began to work at these issues. The first thing in my first meeting, it was jobs, employment. How do we get people employed? And
actually, if I could take you back, you started to speak about the Hyatt.
Yeah.
How was more of a connection made between some of these community needs and the Hyatt?
that to me was the first real, I'll use the word test, but it really wasn't a test, because what began to happen is that as that was evolving, issues of employment became a very major issue. And when John Heldrich took us to Chicago to meet the Hyatt leaders, we were in the city to meet with them. And when they came out, they made sure that I think it was 1/3 of all the jobs were filled in New Brunswick residents, that were there. And it actually creeped up to be a little bit more, but some of their skills weren't meeting Hyatt standards. So over the years, I don't know what the status is now, but initially there was a comprehensive jobs program that to try to connect people with the jobs. Now,
that was true with the Heldrich as well.
It's the same thing,
Yeah.
and because John Heldrich demanded it, I'm sure that the
Yeah.
word demand is not an appropriate word. He insisted upon it, softer
Right.
word, but the same intent. And so there was that connection so that people were getting some jobs. Now, not as many as we would hope, but someone from New Brunswick has never run a hotel. They're not going to be the assistant manager.
Right.
But, that some of the service-related jobs were there, and they were a lot better jobs. But the dilemma with that is, you get someone a job, and they're earning more than they've earned before. They used to live in subsidized housing in New Brunswick, so what do? They now move over to Franklin, or they move over to Somerset because they can afford something different. So what happens is they're backfilled with another family who maybe doesn't live in New Brunswick that has the same economic issues or problems that the initial family did. So there's a cycle there that just a job doesn't mean you're going to get neighborhood renewal because people are working up on Remsen Avenue, but that because as they move out, other people move in the same modest circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an excuse, but that's some of the part of the reality. But there was a direct connection that I think was very positive.
Well, you spoke some about J&J. Maybe you can speak about some of the other players, like Rutgers.
Rutgers was involved, and I guess they were always at the table. There was an inner core at Devco, which I guess you're familiar with, Dr. Blaustein and John Lynch and Heldrich, and there was the group of 5 or 10, was a very small group. They weren't all on my board. I had some representatives. That group, rephrase your question, I'm sorry, I got distracted.
Well, it was Rutgers.
The role of Rutgers
Role of
University.
Rutgers. Well, I think by having Ken Wheeler and subsequently Nancy Winterbauer on our board, their issues and concerns about the students were part of it. But at that time, and I don't know about its status now, there was the town
issues with the students, the town,
and that was hard to engage the students as I look back, because they were seen from the Brunswick Tomorrow, and I'm looking at my perspective, as over there, that they were somewhat insulated from the city itself. And at that time, there was some concern for public safety that is still probably here, but not with the same level of intensity. Again, I'm speaking from my perspective, not necessarily any grand plan for New Brunswick. I think symbolically, and students wouldn't come downtown, but when through Devco, the city, encouragement J&J, the Rutgers bookstore came downtown, it symbolized something. So more students were coming down. A few more students went to the J. August Cafe. They went to that great deli that was right down by where Rafferty's now was. And again, it was gradual, but you saw more student present. Hockey's. Oh, they made great sandwiches. So you were there during that period. And then right across the street from J&J was the George Street Playhouse originally, and that old Academy that was there, where my wife and I had a chance to attend, as well as the Crossroads Theater.
Yeah.
And that was during that period that Rick Kahn and others developed that, but it raised consciousness of community. People in the community participated, or at least attended, but I'm getting off. But Rutgers, I would say in the early years, were supportive, but students weren't as engaged as I presume they are now, because I think there's more internships, there's more work. Some of the students go to Dave Harris's daycare center or to other Elijah's Promise in terms of social work, and social workers were involved in some measure.
How about city government?
Well, I wanted to make sure that, there was a partnership. At times over the years I was there, we would do some modest things, like we would have a summer program for kids recreation, for some job programs, And New Brunswick Tomorrow would spend 30, maybe up to $50,000 one year on children's programs. So we'd write an article at the end of the paper, patting ourselves on the back. But we were able to do that to complement a $300,000 project that the city was, program the city was doing. So that there was sometimes a concern that we were showing up the city, but the city was a partner with us, but at least we got a little bit more public notoriety. But we then complement what the city did. The city did these bus trips or these activities, and we tried to complement them. Sometimes in the public observations when they read the newspaper, they would see New Brunswick first, rather than see that it was a partnership. But the city was always at the table. I would, brief John Lynch every month, every 6 weeks. He had representatives at our board meetings. Same with Paul Abdallah. Dave Crabia was on the board in his position. And so not just the city, but the county was involved, because the county helped with the Middlesex County Extension College Extension program that came in during this period of time. It was up on off of Somerset Street in that building initially, which if it wasn't for Devco and it wasn't for the county college, we were willing to some expenses, and the city underwriting some of the issues related to it, and New Brunswick Tomorrow helping to attract students to come, local people to participate, for GED and other stuff. It wouldn't have happened, but the partnership was effective, and the city was a major player. And I really don't remember
and
any.
John, can you speak some on John Lynch's?
Well, if you remember that period of time when John was mayor and subsequently senator, not a lot happened without John and the staff really being a major player in it. And so John was an integral part of the process. Now, in terms of an operational sense, he wasn't sitting at the table every time making decisions about the program in the Brunswick Tomorrow. But if we were going to do some major things, we would consult, get some input, and make sure they complemented what the city was already doing. That would happen in terms of, let's go back to the homeless program. John initially had some resistance to that, but we were able to convince him that it was better to have homeless people in an environment that made them well and would be in the trailers that would be safe and have them sleeping here. And he agreed to that, and it became a program that he helped to support it publicly, and so he was accepting at that time. But it wasn't without some degree of community concern that you're going to have more people from outside the city come because of the shelter being here. Same with some other projects that were the same. But basically, they were at the table. New Brunswick Tomorrow wasn't operating in isolation, and that's what attracted me to it.
The hospital, where were they in all this?
They were a player at the table too. I think Judy Burgess was on the board. I think Harvey Holzberg was part of that group because they were talking about New Brunswick being a healthcare city long before what has been happening now. And he had a key part because I came back in '81 when it was just Middlesex Hospital, and the only thing was the Robert Wood Johnson tower that was there, but basically a very small hospital. So they were very critical, helpful in terms of the Chandler Center that I mentioned earlier. And Dick Reynolds, who worked in medical school, was a player in that. And whatever we did with health was done in relationship to what they were part of that equation. Also St. Peter's. St. Peter's and Robert Wood were sitting at a table and were part of our health task force. Because, and you didn't ask me yet, but the method we used to do these things was a series of task forces. We had a board, and then when I left, we had 6 task forces. Youth and education, human services, seniors, teens, and children. And then we had an evaluation task force and, and other kind of task forces that would up and down, but those first ones were the ones that were important. And they had 15, 20 people. When I left, if you saw the annual report from 1980 and looked at the back of it, there had to be 150 to 200 people that were involved in some form in the New Brunswick Tomorrow process. Now that didn't happen in 1981, but incrementally over time, more people were at the table, and between 30 and 50% of the people on those boards were either working, most were working, living in New Brunswick and were part of the equation. clergy, again, back to Roy Epps, community people that aren't even here now. They've either passed away or have moved out.
And the community, you mentioned the pastors who were involved, and then like some leaders like Roy Epps, and any others?
Well, Jim Scott was involved, the Housing Authority, again, I don't remember their names at this time. Jimmy Cusera and some of his police officers were involved in some of the SAFE programs, some of the youth program. Don Boylan was involved.
Jim Scott, was he a minister?
No, I'm sorry, he was a member of our board, but he was one of the key community people that lived here in town. Al Cooper was another resident of Brunswick that was involved in this process. And he might be, I don't know where he is right now, not an inappropriate person to interview. But he lives about a block from where Pat Sheehan used to live. So what Pat told you might be consistent with what Al, because Al was from J&J as well. I'd have to do some homework to come up with their names.
Right,
There were other people.
Just taking, are there any other, we spoke about the hospital, J&J, Rutgers, some neighborhoods, any other players?
Well, there were external businesses that had a place. Public Service, New Jersey Bell, Squibb, the banks. They were, from an economic point of view, not just supporting the development, but they had key people sitting at our table as well. And because when we had a summer's jobs program, Squibb took some people, Public Service helped to take some people, Devco took some people from young people. So there was a greater mix than just J&J, the city, and the county. There were other businesses that were involved in this. Middlesex County College, as I mentioned, is over in Edison, but they were engaged. The vocational system, well, we did school, we did the public system, the parochial system, and the vocational system. And the three superintendents sat at the table along with community representatives, and they were discussing related issues of education, some special activities and courses. We had a teacher recognition program for 4 years that was funded by Mr. Burke at that time, the CEO. We gave teachers $5,000 after a long community-based assessment project, which symbolically created more morale in the schools. The teachers were involved and showed we were trying to listen to the teachers' needs. We supported PTA programs. But all of that was, you know, that you don't get headlines for good news like that. But you know, some of these events were covered, but I still felt, even during my whole period, that even though we had good public relations, we got beautiful annual reports, I'm not sure everybody internalized it and could see that incremental, step-by-step process that was trying to touch the quality of life of the city, which is, when I first came, my reason for coming. And gradually, as you can hear by what I'm telling you, I began to believe deeply that you have to balance redevelopment with economic development that pays taxes and supports the infrastructure. When I came, as you remember, George Dorsey was a hole in the ground when they were rebuilding that street, which frankly should be done over right now. But
Yeah,
so
they're
that
planning it.
infrastructure has to be rebuilt, as well as trying to help the neighborhoods, where there's still problems with neighborhoods. You know, that was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you had somebody get shot.
The annual survey, when did that start? And can you talk some
When I
about
was
that?
here, it had started when, I think before I arrived. I think they had a couple. Every 2 years we had it. My feeling was it could have been 1980 or 78. I came in 81. And over the years, and that was one of the ways.
And how would that be used? I mean,
Well, it was. I think there was pleasure in the fact that there was a trend to show that the people interviewed that had a positive impression of the progress. I think if you looked at the Eagleton survey back in 1980 and compare it to 1990, there was an incremental, favorable impression that the city was positive, that people were being served, that the economic development process was working well. But you always had in that, if let's suppose hypothetically that there was 58% said something positive, there were still 38 that were unsure or weren't happy with something. So you did have a balance. But, you know, it was a phone interview. right now, I don't know about you, but if someone calls me up asking for a survey, I get clicked. I don't get, so that I think that. So it was used to help
beyond
strategize.
just saying how people generally thought.
Was
Was that brought into the decision making on what you would be focusing on, or?
Well, it reinforced what we thought was already happening, but it did have an impact. If there was continuing to be some current concerns about a particular area, and I don't want to pick out an illustration except some of the educational related issues, or wanting to have more tutoring, or this, because we asked people, what are some of the issues they had. Every task force would take a look at it and say, what can we do to respond to the tone behind this? It wasn't necessarily that it was cause and effect, it was more the tone. How can we kind of direct it? And obviously, from a broader perspective, that report, which did touch a little on the economic development, was a tool to help the public beyond New Brunswick realize that something special was happening here that was different, that the dream of Leo Molinaro and Richard Sellars was becoming a reality. Now, since I left in the 14 years, that what had been achieved in that first 14 has probably tripled. So much has happened from an economic point of view, and I haven't been as directly involved in how that has been, how New Brunswick Tomorrow has kept up with it. But my understanding that job programs and educational programs have been continued in a very positive way.
You talk some on the governance of New Brunswick Tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, we have had a board of, I think, about 20 to 24 people. It was representative by some of the constituencies I've already mentioned. It had a meaning Rutgers and some of the official and some of the businesses, but it also had a clergyman or two. Monsignor Krupi was on it. Several of the clergy were on it from Bodner over the years. Roy Epps was in it from the very beginning. He was one of the founding members. So there was community represented, the county, Middlesex County College. Now, not as many neighborhood people like you would have on it as you would have at Chandler Center. The neighborhood people, many would be on our task forces, and a few would be represented on the board. But it wasn't 51% as some of the government programs.
How many
I
people
can't
like
even,
that?
I'd have to go back and check.
Sure.
Because Jim Scott and Roy Epps, and then say the two clergy, at least 20% were.
So you have the larger board,
and then you have an executive committee, and that had with Mr. Heldrich as the chair of that committee, and behind the scenes they were the ones that kind of structured things, and the chairpersons of each of the task forces would be on the executive committee.
And the members of the executive, so you have the chairs from the 6 task forces.
Yes, that would be on the executive committee.
And who
so
else would be
Nancy Winterbauer was the I think the chair of the educational task force. She'd remember that she would be on the executive committee as a consequence of that. If Mr. Feist was active, you remember her Feist?
He was a realtor.
Feist, but he was in the United Way for 30 years, deeply committed to human services. He was from Highland Park, and he was the head of the Human Services Task Force. Tony Morano, who was WCTC and your announcer here for football, he was he just had a compassion for young people, so he was the youth task force chairperson. So that illustrates it. So those people were on the executive committee.
So you have the task force, the heads of the members the heads of the task forces were on the executive committee. And whom else would?
Then the rest of the board of directors would receive information about each of the task forces, and they would be asked to act on any particular issues. If we were going to raise funds or wanted to make a major commitment of funds toward a certain project, the board had to make that decision. The task force would recommend it. One illustration, if you want me to give you an illustration,
sure.
Which was one that had controversy connected with it in terms of community and even the political. I had to go do a lot of homework to make it happen. Was we wanted to institute at the high school a program for teen parents that had children, so that they could attend school and have children. Well, when you raise that issue, there are many people who are very conservative initially react that if you are providing services for teen parents, you're going to contribute to promiscuity and negative behavior. Well, we didn't believe that that would happen, so we began a process of trying to get key people to advocate for it. And again, Mayor Cahill, I think, just became mayor when that was happening, and he happens to be of a religious faith that may not, some people were against it. So we began a process, and the board had to really struggle with it for community reasons, not just for the project. But myself and my small staff, because we only have 5 people to work together with, and that the task force of the youth task force really worked hard at structuring. We had a children's task force to work hard at framing it. And so there was initially some resistance to the concept. But over time, we were able to model our daycare center. It's called Pixie. I forget why it's called Pixie. P-I-C. Forget why, but there is a good reason.
Program.
We went over to Plainfield where they had a successful one. And with my strategy, which is a little anecdote, which you may have never used, John Heldrich went with us. And we walk in, and here's this room full of babies. And the director of the Plainfield Child Care Center picked up one of the babies that was just cute and cooing away there. And she said, "Would you like to hold him, Mr. Heldrich?" So John Heldrich held the baby. At the next board meeting, we had won him over when he saw that. And I mean, he may have other reasons, but I always felt that was instrumental to John saying, we got to give these kids a chance. And when I left, because there was about 10, maybe 12 that were using it, that at that time, I think we had, let's say we had 90 girls enrolled. I think like 80 of them had gone to Rutgers because they graduated from high school.
Wow.
And were able to go. And so I'm not saying that if they were that motivated and that well, that they may not have it happen without the daycare center. But I believe the children were served, that the young people were served. And I mention that as what I'm saying is one of the achievements that as I look back, I said, it's still there. Chandler is still there. Some things are still there, because you leave and certain things drift away. But I know that it has really touched community young people. Now, right now, it doesn't get much visibility. At the time, it had a one-day headline. We got the schools to give us space. We renovated the space. We had a little opening. And maybe there was a small article and this article, but none of the issues. And then so it's quietly operated for 10 to 12 children all these years. The Board of Education, I'll talk about, what the boards of education are like, trying to get them to agree to give us the space that was the locker room, weight room for the football team.
Wow.
But John,
but
Ron
they probably
Larkin,
got bigger space someplace.
and I was going to mention, if you want to interview someone else, Dr. Larkin, I don't know how you
Oh yeah, Ron Larkin.
I think you'd find, from his perspective, I think it would be an interesting person for you to talk to. But he was really gung-ho. Penny Latimer, which I'm assuming you have, because if you don't have the schools, and then the teachers had some resistance because they didn't know how it would, impact their work. And at the same time, forgive me if I'm rambling on, the state had a major, right before it, but had a major grant possibility. It was a school-based program where you could get funds for the state to open up, put a counselor, more a mental health counselor, not a school counselor, into the schools of New Brunswick, so that young people with emotional problems and family problems could have some objective person that wasn't being paid for by the school to interact with. And so I think we got $250,000, and we put some money into it. And at that time, we had a counselor, either part-time or full-time, in all the schools. So we worked up like a youth center up at the high school. So there was a room, a pool table, and other games, and after school or during the day, the young people could drop in, and there were counselors. And it was run by the Mental Health Center, UMDNJ's Mental Health Center. Now that's changed. I still think the function is there, but it's managed differently. But it was, again, youth task force. Should we take the grant? What's the implication for this? Task force likes the idea. Executive committee let's present it to the board. Now they were enthusiastic because you got Heldrich, Feist, and Epps saying, we've got to do this. Right. And so then they take it to the board. The board agrees. And then we have to find the money, we have to do the paperwork, and we got the grant. And that was, another issue that complemented youth program and youth and children's programs. Now, that kind of activity in a town the size of New Brunswick, we aggregate out Rutgers, 45, 50,000. I don't know what the exact population is now. In the city is manageable and possible. But if you have a city as large as Newark or as large as Camden, it's going to be harder because the magnitude of the issues and the problems are intense, and they don't have one high school. And you may not be able to model this in larger cities. Okay. Conceptually, you can. Humans, but to have it be as workable and practical and doable in terms of how neighborhoods feel.
And I'd like to return to that point a little later. Any other? I know New Brunswick Tomorrow did a lot under your tutelage. Any other things you might want to mention about some initiatives that you thought were particularly?
I don't want to. I didn't do it. Well, you've already asked me about the Hyatt. The summer concert series. I came down here, and I'm here 3 months, and said, we got to work on the concert series. And I said, what? So did you ever participate, ever go to any of the concerts up at Waterloo Park?
Yeah.
Because every year we arranged for Lionel Hampton to come, which was so enriching. Thousands
And then the Metropolitan Opera started.
Opera was there, the New Jersey Symphony, we had a bluegrass night.
And how did that come about, the concert?
It was here when I started, it was the second year. But conceptually behind the scenes with that was, let's start having people come to the city to have a cultural event, a musical event. And whenever I would get up and say my welcome to people, I'm saying this is the precursor to what you will be able to do in years to come at the State Theater. Honestly, I'm not sure that was going to happen because I've been in the State Theater and the roof was leaking. And if I could tell you a brief anecdote, if you want me to, New Jersey Symphony was going to be here. But there was a threat of heavy thunder showers. You know how they do today, 30%. Well, if I had the symphony up in the park and a thunderstorm comes, we've got a serious problem with all those people, particularly lightning and thunder. So, much to the dismay of a lot of people, I moved it into the State Theater. Well, the State Theater wasn't a very nice place to have a concert at that time. It was dark, it was damp, it was depressing. But the orchestra began. So I went up in the balcony. We had a good crowd, but not like we would have. And I'm sitting there, everybody's mad. I'm sitting there frustrated that I made this decision because, it was bad. Then I went out at the intermission, and I looked at the horizon. I said, "Uh-oh, here it comes." And right at the beginning of the second half of the concert, it rained and rained and rained. However, the orchestra comes out, and after about 3 bars, they left the stage. So I go down and go back and talk to them. He says, "We cannot play. Roof leak." So here I had made this decision, and I was being vindicated, and they ran out real quickly, and they played the Sousa March, and then I had to dismiss it, because here they were. So it was like, I did the wrong thing, come inside. I did the right thing. And so it was just, but it was a precursor to a desire to have culture in the arts. Did it have a major impact? I don't know. But at least it was in the intent to deal with that.
Was New Brunswick Tomorrow involved with the cultural section?
But yeah, well, the people that are on the board were. We didn't have a direct relationship, except Bill Wright was supportive to the Devco and was supportive to New Brunswick Tomorrow. We would occasionally meet in a general way, but that was really a separate entity that grew out of the whole revitalization.
And the relationship between New Brunswick Tomorrow and Devco
was very strong. And another person you may want to consider finding, and I don't know where you're finding, because his name's never mentioned now in spite of all that. But those early years when I was there, at least for 7 or 8 years, do you know who I'm talking about?
Nero?
Paul Abdallah. And Frank Nero, who follows him. Frank followed him, and he's down in Florida now. But if you could somehow have, but Paul knew Mr. Sellars. And if it wasn't for Paul advocating with Richard Sellars, the State Theater would have been torn down. Because Mr. Sellars put up his own funds to hold that. Did someone already told you that?
Kenneth Wheeler told us the story about the New York architect who told Kenneth there are 3 things it needs to have. If it has those, then it's not worth it. If it doesn't have it, then you have an ideal vaudeville theater, well built, and you should keep it. So he brought Bob Totten in. He said Bob Totten was like very religious and didn't want to go in a porno theater. And said you can walk in backwards. We just have to look at the back of it. So they did, and they found out that it conformed to what would make it a good architectural structure. So I guess then they went to Sellars.
And Sellars put their money out to hold it, but someone else wanted to buy it.
Right.
I don't know what they were doing, but
Paul
Paul was very involved with Sellars, Heldrich, and John Lynch, and was really one of the fundamental players in that early period. I forget when he actually left, he
was with Devco or New Brunswick Tomorrow?
he was the head of Devco, and his office we were on the same floor. And on occasions I'd go down and brainstorm with him some things, and he'd come in. But his decision making and the process that he used was different from mine. I mean, he took me down to Columbia, Maryland, where I could meet Leo Molinaro. He took me down to Baltimore to show the Harbor Place, which conceptually was part of Molinaro's vision, because he's done that too. So I got along well with Paul. He was a firm, strong leader, but he was sometimes my point of access to John Lynch, because Paul would understand where I was and could interpret some of that. This minister here trying
and
to...
again, the relationship between the Brunswick Tomorrow, which is doing mainly social services, employment, education, and Devco is...
We're cooperating. Devco didn't do that, but Devco and
how would you cooperate? Just
well, the Hyatts. The employment issue was strong. Property. The Chandler Center needed help with physical space, and Devco was part of that equation. They helped to be part of the equation of downtown in the terms of the Chandler relocation. They were part of in getting that supermarket in town.
Can you talk some about the supermarket?
Well, just that it had been ongoing, because there was no supermarket in New Brunswick, and they had tried to get some people to come in, but the condition of the 1980s didn't warrant a market, because many of the people who could afford to go to the traditional market, they went to Somerset, they went to Franklin, they went out to North Brunswick, because they had transportation. So people without cars, or who were limited in transportation, needed some place. And it was a struggle to find that company to come in. I don't even know whether it's the same company.
C-Town is still C-Town. Somebody else took it over, I think, an individual, but it's still a C-Town.
I mean, there was a little bit overpriced, but at least it was convenient. And that was part of the community's need, but the city and Devco really took the lead in that. We helped a little bit behind the scenes, and supported of it, but it was really the city and Devco putting their heads together to address what is not just an economic issue, but a human services, community service need.
Now, another physical change was the whole Hiram District area, which seems to me there might have been some issues where Devco wanted to do physical changes, and it was negatively viewed by the community. So did NBT get involved in any of those hearings?
I had a lot of distance down there. I think it was Bob Snyder and a few others, and there was a young fellow at Rutgers that really put pressure to kind of save the district and kind of wanted to have it rebuilt. That was before New Black opened up the Frog and the Beach down there. But there was a real struggle because of, I think there was a suit concerning saving it. But the compromise came back that right now, if you want to know what was there was that photographic, there is a very detailed record of all the buildings that were there. But some people came in and said there was not a lot substantively there that could really be saved, that would fit into an architectural scheme that someone new would come in that would want to be there. But that was a Devco concern. They invited us to come in because, in terms of consulting and participating, because we knew the community people, some of them a little bit better. But it was really Devco and the cities trying to work out this compromise.
And the community perspective on Hiram's?
Well, I say the community. That really would go more back to, I would say, to Rutgers and the city.
How so?
Well, because Rutgers, some of the staff there, or the professors, or other, and then students who were in their classes, felt that this was a historic district that should have been saved. Now, I don't have all the specificity of that, but there was that strong concern that you're losing a part of the history of New Brunswick by doing that. And they would say, well, you already got rid of the block where J&J is, you got rid of the block with the Hyatt, where will you stop? Well, there was not much economic viability in there. Most of us were upset because the Crossroads Theater, the way it was configured up down there, was kind of a neat building, and the plays were personal and small, but that's when you walked through it internally and you went upstairs and looked around, you saw that trying to economically renew it would not only be difficult, but who would be willing to make that kind of investment? So I believe Devco, in a very pragmatic need, tried to develop a compromise, and that's why funding was found, I guess, through some historical program in Trenton, to try to capture what was there, record it. I think they even photographed it, and it's somewhere in the public record that it's there. So if you were doing research about New Brunswick, that would be available. And there's a lot of pictures of it, as you probably have seen over the years.
If you would evaluate, perhaps with 20/20 hindsight, what was accomplished, what was not, things could have, should have done differently, perhaps.
Well, I've shared a few of the things that I felt from my point of view. There are a lot of small things over the way in terms of youth programs and recreation, and it's hard to go back and look at something and say, what would you do better or differently? Because, I came in there with a vision, and I'm impatient as by nature. If we're going to go on vacation next week, I want to do it tomorrow. Let's go tomorrow. I mean, in temperament. So I came and I wanted to see things happen, and I would like to see it happen quicker. But over time, I began to realize that the revitalization is a process. It's step by step. And that if you rush it too quickly, it's premature and won't be successful. But you've got to do it incrementally, and you also have to have some symbols. A symbol, going back anecdotally, one of the first things I was involved in having done was getting the escalator in the old train station working. It sounds silly, but really, it was a symbol to New Brunswick that you couldn't ride up in the escalator. So Lee Fagioni, and God bless her if she were alive, if you want to mention her name somewhere, she was a very catalytic, dynamic woman that helped to hire me and was, for at least 5-6 years, part of the board. She's the kind of woman that would walk in the room and light it up. She had this outgoing Italian personality. So because it was a process, it's hard to go back and second guess the process and what I would do differently, because if I said we should have done this, the town wasn't ready to do this because of my impatience. I was sometimes moving ahead of the curve. And then gradually I realized that if, my hope to do some things began to modify, because I knew that you can't just go out on a limb when you don't have the support.
Can you give an example of that? Or?
Well, we mentioned earlier, it would have been nice if earlier there was additional housing that was available for low and moderate income folks. The first set of low and moderate income housing was right up on Georgian Commercial. Devco did it. It's great housing. That was back early, in the early 80s. And it was exciting. But I think the residents there were more moderate than low income housing. But it was years before, that the momentum came to do some of that. And so even though it wasn't New Brunswick Tomorrow's role, or my personal role, it was I wish that maybe we had been able to push that more so that there was more quality housing earlier. I think it was in the process of happening, and if you're honest, in the year 2009, it's ongoing, and that need would continue to exist. In any city it would. But my hope would be, let's do it, rather than let's wait for the process to get there. And sometimes I became, in my own inner self, a little bit impatient. And that would be, and I know, even though some people would look at the statistics and criticize New Brunswick schools in terms of the tests they take and so forth. But I believe there's been incremental progress in the schools. The dimension of having more Latino families and the implications of English as a second language in new families has complicated it, but I believe there's strong teachers and there's strong education going on. They just can't interpret that appropriately through the kind of standardized testing. And I felt it's improving, but the statistics and the perception stay behind. And I just wish that we could sell people on some good things are happening. Have confidence in the system, whereas rather than always criticize it. But every article about education in the home news had a negative tint, because statistically, spending too much, not getting enough accomplished. Well, we tried to track the first grade of a school in North Brunswick and a first grade at Robeson School. We're going to home news going to parallel them over the next 5 years, see how they progress. In the second year, there were only 3 students left in that class at Robeson because they were in other schools in Brunswick. They still live in Brunswick.
Right.
So if there is that change, that dynamic isn't understood. So they criticize the school and sometimes the teachers, whereas I could see that the teachers are doing, and I was upset. And I wish, if I go back, that there could have been a way to try to translate that. The stereotype. It wasn't poor teaching. It wasn't kids that couldn't learn. It was a much greater problem than people were willing to recognize it. And that's the kind of thing that, and it was my impatience to see it. I want everybody to have a nice house. I want everybody to have a job. It doesn't happen that way just because I.
So I don't. The role of New Brunswick Tomorrow and Memorial Homes. Can you just speak? So I don't.
See, that again was part of a long process, and the major changes happened after I left. We tried to be responsive to the children at Memorial Homes with summer program. But since the Housing Authority was primarily responsible for that, we did not directly become engaged in that whole dilemma and structure. There was an annual, that first night kind of thing that went out, the police department and New Brunswick Tomorrow working together. There would be some bus trips. But what we did was very superficial to addressing the complicated issues. I know that behind the scenes, the city and the Housing Authority wanted to improve this and that, and there was people at Devco that helped fix the elevator and do some other things. But since there were not at that time alternative for housing and the resources to pay for it, there was that public dilemma, and then the negative dimension, which sometimes washed over the people and made judgments of the people, which bothered us because it wasn't the people, it was the issue of poverty and whatever that meant. So New Brunswick Tomorrow didn't directly get involved because you need jobs and housing, and we tried to get some, and we did have some people from more homes get jobs at the Hyatt. Now whether they completed them and so forth, I can't say. But there was a desire to be supportive to the residents. We didn't have any role in trying to find them new homes because that was a struggle that the city was doing.
You started to speak earlier about transferability. If we can share your thoughts, how transferable is what happened in New Brunswick to other urban places?
Conceptually, I think it's very transferable if you get the right people at the table. Maybe a poor illustration was, I know back in the late 1990s, late 1980s, we went down to Asbury Park to make a presentation. Paul Dalla, John Lynch, myself, I think even the Housing Authority, and speak to the group there, because Asbury Park has a reasonable size, get your hands around it, but without, again, the kind of player there, the corporate player that would take a lead and some financial funds up front. They struggled over these years, and now it's finally beginning to turn around. It would have even, but it's taken years. The New Brunswick Tomorrow model would work in that type of city, given the players, being in place. But I don't know whether
Tomorrow
it is.
Model is the opposite.
No, I meant the revitalization model. I don't mean that. So, and
that model would be an agency such as New Brunswick Tomorrow trying to further social welfare, a development entity such as Devco?
I believe that's essential to successful revitalization, that you have to have, for two reasons. One is it makes practical sense to include it. It's a moral issue that you don't want to just come in with new buildings and structures without interfacing with the community and getting some input and trying to make them be a benefit. And there's a public relations reason. But it is a model that's essential, and I think Hartford had a model that Leo Malinaro had recommended. But this concept of a duality. Now, obviously, in terms of financial, public relations, and public awareness, the brick and mortars get a higher priority. But you need some people behind the scenes trying to struggle with what are the issues and what people need. And our process wasn't entirely ideal all the time, but there was a clear intent of the board to try to work with youth and children and families to try to make the Brunswick more than just brick and mortar, that the quality of life was deeply being impacted and touched. And that's because I just pointed one person, John Heldrich, and all that people say about him, and you may know about him. I spent a lot of time with him alone. And some of the issues I've talked to him about, he had a passion for, and really wanted to leave a legacy of not just a new hotel, but of a city that, people feel proud of, people can walk the streets in, and that the neighborhood people feel a sense of accomplishment. John and Regina went to France, and I forget what city they were in, but they were noted that the beautiful flowers downtown, beautiful flowers all over, and he came back, and initially before they renovated the bridge to Highland Park, he had J&J put up the flower extensions. You remember those? We had a neighborhood flower contest. We had the garden program, and for about 3 years, the gardens and flowers were blooming all over New Brunswick. And it was his passion that make people feel better. And so he had that passion. And to me, I know John Lynch, Paul Abdallah, Frank Nero, Richard Sellars, but to me, even though John Heldrich wanted this economic development with brick and mortar, but his social and broader perspective made the difference. Not every town has that kind of visionary. So you can't put this in a book if you don't have the people that really see the balance and are willing to get a person a job as well as build a new building. And John did, and it was his vision. And obviously Sellars and others, but when 20 years from now, I just hope people can recognize that, and I would see it happening. It can't happen in Philadelphia. I don't think it can happen in Pennsylvania. I mean, in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. But it can happen in Altoona.
Because of the size?
The size.
What about
critical
Newark?
mass. Newark has its own way of trying to do it now. Booker has done support for neighborhood groups, but again, the problems are so intense. The housing is so difficult. Employment is still so difficult. And again, you got the whole pattern. You have people who finally make it, they get jobs, and they slide over to Irvington, or they move to another area, and then they're backfilled for other people who have some of the basic economic problems. It's a cycle,
Right.
where new immigrants come in and they take the place. And so that's the cycle. And then people judge revitalization based upon what they perceive their negative stereotypes rather than realize that that cycle exists. And you just have to step by step, and there's no miracle. It's funny, the man that followed me at Vailsburg back in 1980 when I left, he's still there. Mike Farley, he's still there, and he's still taking step by step. And he's been there through a major change in that whole Vailsburg community. And I'm sure he was up at Ivy Hill Apartments when those young people were killed a few years ago because of the community reaction to that.
Right.
Any topics that we haven't covered that you want to get down on the record?
No, I mean, it's just, no. But your last question to me is the most important. Is it replicable? Because my answer is yes, and because of that balance. And that would be my final theme. Quality of life and a partnership between the public and private sector is essential, which touches community life. And that would be the fundamental issue. Now, you know, you're interviewing Roy Epps, and you're interviewing Peggy? Penny Lattimore?
We haven't yet.
Well, I have a feeling, I mean, her cultural center background, her assistant superintendent of schools,
Right.
I think she's an idea, and
Sure.
Larkin too, Ron Larkin.
Uh-huh.
He was involved with the
Right.
Brunswick Tomorrow process, and he might make a few comments
Sure.
about that,
Okay.
which could supplement, because he knew what was happening,
Right.
at least for the educational piece. And then, Nancy, what about?
Yes, we are going to be
And
interviewing her.
she's.
So what about documents?
I have my Brunswick Tomorrow annual
Annual
reports that you certainly.
We can take a look.
You can have them if you don't have them. The library has
The
them.
library.
Yeah,
The library now being the New Brunswick.
Yes, the New Brunswick Library has them. The office down there may have them. Jeffrey Vega, I think you've already interviewed.
Yeah. Right.
And he probably said some of the things I have said. But Jeffrey used to work for me. He worked for me about 2 years before.
Right. Now, when you left, was it Steve O'Connor who came in?
Yeah, Steve came in for 4 years
Okay.
before Jeffrey. I think 4 or 5 years before. And I think
Steve is
Chris Folio.
finishing his doctorate here.
Is he really?
He should be defending in about a month.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then what did you do with the Robert? You went to work then for the Robert
I,
Johnson Foundation?
I was getting in transition. John Heldrich was going to leave as chairman of the board. John felt strongly that if a new chairman was coming, since I was the president of the organization for his tenure,
Mhm.
that the new chairperson should be able to have
I see.
select his own person,
Mhm.
and that because I carried, I won't say his words, the baggage, but I was part of the past,
Mhm.
and that shouldn't influence the future.
So who came in as the new president?
Chris Jelson, who was active,
yeah,
he
yeah.
was he
Right.
died of
Yeah.
cancer, but he was the president, the chairman of the board
Okay.
at that time.
And that's when Steve O'Connor came in?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So when I went to the foundation, I just went down to talk to Dr. Reynolds, just networking. And one of the program offices called the Local Funding Partners Program and the New Jersey Health Initiatives were two grant-making programs from the foundation that, again, fostered partnerships. It was community-based programs. It was ideally suited to what I did before in Newark and even New Brunswick. And so they had a major grant program for just New Jersey, again, community-based programs.
Mhm.
And then they had one for the national office, and I became the deputy director of those two programs. And I stayed there 11 years.
How is the foundation involved in New Brunswick?
Well, they're part of the legacy. You're familiar with the foundation's legacy projects that grow right out
If you
of
can speak about it, that would be good.
General Johnson. He was a grassroots street kind of person in the sense that he walked the streets of New Brunswick, and if he saw something that bothered him, or he would respond to it. If he saw a house in the Hungarian ward that looked like it needed some help, and that person worked for J&J, go get it painted.
Cool.
He was that kind of person. So he came up with about 7 or 8 projects in New Brunswick that he was identified with. The Kitty Keep Well program, which is a summer camp for disabled children, and the Salvation Army, and I think there's a place of the Citadel or something like that for Catholic nuns. He has about 7 or 8. So they continue with the foundation, and it's the New Brunswick area. But they also have made major investments in New Brunswick Tomorrow social programs, and still continue to. They support in part some aspects of the work of Devco, not for economic development, but more in terms of the administration of Devco. So they have been involved. But they're not actively involved at the table, because they couldn't. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to be. But during my tenure there, a man by the name of Terrence Keenan was my point person, and I would go every 6 months and update him, and he would give me encouragement, or that he was very pleased. He'd come to events at J&J or events in community from time to time. So it was more not a decision-making role, but a funding role, but a real support of it conceptually. But also the hospital. Well, the investment in the medical center, the investment in the UMD&J, the major dollars that have helped build that. When I first did Elijah's Promise, I was able to get a local attorney to give us $100,000 to renovate where they are now. in terms of the soup kitchen. Well, J&J matched that money, and Chandler Center, they helped. But they did a lot of that behind the scenes. They didn't take a high profile of that.
Mhm.
You may not know this, but in 1972, Johnson & Johnson, the foundation began right up on Welton, on Livingston Avenue. They had a little house. And there's a big ad that this $1 billion foundation was going to be established. And Terrence Keenan was there at that time, and it was in the home news. Well, that night of that big announcement, some young people broke in looking for the money. But they only had a territory to tell that story.
Okay, well,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to kind of tell my story. I know it's not as dramatic
If
as...
there's anything else that you want to share with us, we
Let
would
me
be
go
very
get
pleased.
the, I'm gonna go get the form for you.
Okay, very good.
Now, maybe you could mention to David while I'm downstairs, you had said you thought we should, and I can turn these off, apply to the Robert Wood Johnson
Oh.
Foundation for further funding.